So, Joseph, welcome here. I'm very excited about the conversation we're going to have in the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to talk about StartX, the famous accelerator, startup accelerator at Stanford. I have to say that we had a lot of speakers here on our Minded Chat. I think at least half of them would have somewhat an integration or connection with Stanford at some moment of their development, whether they've been professors or for the most part investors and even more entrepreneurs. So very much at the core, I think, not just of the ecosystem, but also of our related ecosystem of corporate investors that we talked to. So why don't we start a little bit with your upbringing, studying computer science clearly at Stanford, what took you then eventually to StartX? So also through, I think, a path of as an entrepreneurial self.
So I actually did my graduate school at Stanford. I grew up in Canada, so I'm international, maybe less international than you guys, but Canadian. Went to University of Waterloo for my undergrad, and I did computer electrical engineering there. And Waterloo is a really interesting university because usually when you go to school, to pass a school term, you have to pass your midterm exams, and you have to pass your final exams, and then if everything goes well, they let you do, that, and you repeat. Waterloo, the one thing that's different is you have to pass your midterm exams, as well as you have to apply to up to 50 jobs in the real world. And then to pass your school term, you have to pass all your final exams and go to any interview that those job applications created and get a job at least one, and then work there for 4 months and then get a positive performance review, like 8 or higher.
Before graduating?
In order to pass this one term, one semester. Then you have to do the next semester.
It sounds fantastic.
It's called a co-op program. And so what happens is, at first you think, oh, this is great. It's like a summer job and you get some real work experience. But within 2 years, you'll find, and everyone you've been to university, every professor has the theoretical stuff they try to teach and the applied stuff they try to teach. And within the first year, everyone learns the same as any student. Within year 2, when they start to teach the theoretical stuff, the students just reject it. They won't do the homework. They don't want to pay attention. They're like, why are we learning this? I already got a job. I'm working at this thing. We can't use that. How are we going to use that? It's too theoretical. So the whole school becomes very practically minded and very industry focused. And they have a rule that you can't go back to the same company again under certain conditions. And so you end up seeing a bunch of different industries also. So you get it's an engineering perspective, a wide industry perspective. And along the way, I spent half of those at startups. In one of them, I was employee number 3. And one of them, I was employee number 7 when I started and employee number 4 when I left. So, the ups and downs of a startup were very real to me.
So what happens if you don't find that job and you can't graduate?
You don't pass that term, and then you have to keep trying and make it up some other way. Just like if you don't pass a class, you have to eventually sort of make that up.
So it's very stressful.
They give you one, you can fail 1 out of the 6 or something. You have to get 6 out of 8. There's some quota. But the majority of students will, they train you on how to interview and professional behavior and there's going to be meetings at work. What are you supposed to do? Because you have to learn that, so then they do it.
So you become very entrepreneurial also.
Yeah, so Waterloo is one of the most entrepreneurial-minded schools there. Sort of real-world thinking. I don't want to say entrepreneurial because that can mean many things, but definitely real-world problem solving. And what happens is, in most schools, the best performing students will go on to grad school and sort of continue their work. At Waterloo, it's the opposite. The worst performing students go on, not worst, but it's so easy to get a job because you've worked at these 8 places. And if you're trying to hire someone for your company, you can either interview 10 people and have as much interviewing as you want, 1 or 2 days, or you can see their work product over 4 months and say, okay, well, that's good enough for me, let's hire them. And you don't have to train them, they show up sort of way. So everyone has 4, 5, 6 job offers when they leave. And if you don't like any of those companies, you can just ask anybody in your class, say, hey, what are your 6? Refer me, and then you get interviews and you go. So everyone has a job offer. It's the people who don't have job offers that seriously consider graduate school at Waterloo. So it's the opposite.
So you keep studying. It's funny, not too long ago we had here Nico Bonazzo, so I'm sure you know from General Catalyst.
Oh, absolutely.
that spent a good amount of time at Stanford, and he actually was telling us, sharing with us these, one of the biggest lessons learned there is the ability of cold calling. I mean, cold calling and writing blind emails that I'm sure that you develop at that age, especially when they're looking for a specific internship and job offers as one of the key elements to be successful for the rest of your life, at least in this moment in time, these decades. It's funny that probably, a lot of the ability there is to look for, to get the right entry point.
Oh yeah, and you get used to not worrying about it if people say no, right? And that's a life skill you need to learn too. And Nico is great because actually, if you guys got to hear from him, he was in the very first class of StartX cohort ever with his own company. And so he'll give you a really, really great picture. Also, his perspective is from the very beginning of StartX. And hopefully today I can give you a picture of how StartX has evolved 10 years later, and you can actually you can make that connection yourself, which would be really cool.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So a great, bridge to eventually, the world of entrepreneurship. What took you to Silicon Valley in general?
Yeah, so two things. One, I didn't do it because of startups, but I did know. And in fact, when I was going to graduate from Waterloo, the job offers I had, the one I was going to take was a startup in Canada. In 2009, they were making quad-rotor drone cameras. And in 2009, if you think about this, so everyone's got these now, right? These quad-rotors, the drones, the cameras, the GoPros, all the DJI and stuff. Back then, it was not legal in most markets to fly one of those because the FAA still controlled the airspace. But Canada was more progressive and had created a new law before all the other countries. So they were like 3 or 4 years ahead of the entire market, and I thought it was really cool to get to work on that. So I was gonna work at that startup, and part of that was because half of my co-op work placements, I had worked in big companies, which is great because you get to understand how the large corporate world works, how innovation, why there is or isn't innovation. And then I got to work in these tiny companies. And the one thing I'll always remember is when I worked at a big company, there were just so many people, like even you would get assigned work and you're like, okay, I'm working on this small piece of this one widget that's like one product in this large product suite that's like one business unit of the whole company. And when you work at a startup, they're like, okay, you need to make this work or the whole company doesn't work. It's yours. And you have no choice. You work on something that's really important. And I always remember every moment of a startup, even me, this college kid that they hired at like half salary because it's cheap. Like I had just as important work as anywhere. So I love that feeling. And I didn't come to Silicon Valley because of the startup world. I actually applied, just like I was saying at Waterloo, nobody applies to grad school. And so you're in your final year of school and there's some deadline to apply to graduate school. And I said, okay, my parents want me to apply, I'll apply. But you can still turn it down. They accept you, you don't have to go. I'm gonna go work at my startup, this startup that I like, it's gonna be great.
But your parents won't be too happy, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, we didn't get there. So, you apply to Stanford, you apply to MIT, you apply to Carnegie Mellon, you apply to some of these places. And of course, February, March rolls around. If you get a letter in the mail saying, hey, come do computer science at Stanford, like, how are you supposed to say no? It's just no way. And so I said, okay, well, I really don't want to do more school. I love solving real problems. And at school, you don't solve real problems. But I came to Stanford and I made a promise to myself. I said, look, I'm going to do the two things you don't get to do unless you're at Stanford or unless you're in grad school. So number one, teach. So as a student, you can, teach each other, but like graduate students get to teach undergrad, and that's an opportunity I'm not going to ever get ever again. I want to see what that's like. And I was, so I was make sure I took that opportunity and I taught operating systems and various things. And number two is like do real research in a real lab. Because again, when you're in school, you get to some point if you're an engineer that like every class is nothing more than just more textbooks. Like the professor's just reading from the textbook anyway. Why can't I just read from the textbook, right? This is like Elon Musk's favorite thing. Just give me a textbook, I'll learn it. So research, real research in a real lab, just try to do some real stuff. And Stanford's rich, so they have some really fancy labs. And teach. Stanford's got great students, but anyway, just get an opportunity to teach. And number three is I was going to take the courses that are so hard that if you don't have a professor and you don't have a TA like telling you why you're doing it wrong, you can't learn it. So differential calculus, signal processing, Fourier transforms, like that. It's just, I don't think I could ever learn that if they didn't say, no, you're wrong, do it again, no, you're wrong, do it again, here's how you get unstuck. So I spent my time on those things. And that led me to the self-driving car lab at Stanford with Sebastian Thunder, doing research there, you got to teach. And he utilized a lot of these advanced probabilistic models, and linear algebra, calculus, and things to make the self-driving car work. And then I met my co-founder. So Dave Millman, who we ended up starting a company with, along with Jessica and Darren. Dave was my lab partner in this lab. And he really got my attention because most people, again, they graduate from a standard university and then they do their graduate school at Stanford, and it's sort of just like they've done some book learning and they do some more book learning. And they're really smart and really talented. I think that's great. But Dave had gone on to work after university. He graduated in New York, and he had built, the game Counter-Strike, right? The video game, if you played it before. The Navy has an internal version that they use for training and simulation and stuff. So he architected that. And he said, I'm gonna so he told this story about how he asked the guy in the cubicle beside him and said, hey, how long have you been here? And he said, 17 years. And he goes, oh, how long have you been here? He goes, 24 years. And he's like, okay, well, I don't know about that, but I don't want to still be here in 17 years. I have to do something. So he applied to Stanford and he got in. So he was a little older, but what I really loved about him is when we took courses together, worked on problems together, he also said, how do we apply this in the real world?
So because you came from that experience of working for longer than getting an understanding of how useful is that today?
Right. And so we worked really well together. We took on a project, self-driving car by 2010, 2009 or so had basically learned to drive itself. And we were trying to say, hey, what were all the breakthroughs that happened in the self-driving car that allowed us to even make that possible? And can any of those breakthroughs be applied to other fields? And so 2009, it's kind of like a joke now because everyone has a smartphone. But in 2009, people were saying, you know what? One day, everyone's going to have a smartphone. Your mom, your kids, your grandma, everyone's got a smartphone. You won't believe it. Okay, maybe. And then they said, okay, but if that's true, it's a big industry. Maybe we should see if any of our technologies apply there. So we got a fellowship called the Qualcomm Innovation Fellowship. And usually when you get a fellowship for a research lab, they give you like $100,000 to do the research, you publish some papers, and you're all set. And of course, Sebastian's lab was great, and they got lots of different grants and fellowships. But this one was special because the Qualcomm Innovation Fellowship, you get $100,000 for the lab and 1 hour a week with one of their senior engineers. So David Stavens had applied for this grant, and it was great. They won it, and then he was like, oh, but we got all these grants. What do I do? And me and my co-founder said, okay, well, we love this. It's a real industry person. It's going to give us a real industry take. And so let's work on it. And so we love that. We got to sit down with Alok Agarwal was his name. I think he still works at Qualcomm. And he would give us ideas or just color industry perspective on whatever research. We still wanted to publish a paper. And so we would sit with him, and I still remember at the very beginning, and this is how we ended up starting our company.
Sorry, there you are in the lab. We're not at Qualcomm. So Qualcomm
That's right.
goes to the lab.
They sent us a mentor.
As one of
an
the
industry
sponsors, right, for some of these labs. It's actually interesting topics that I would like to address later because it's really an integration of the industry with the quality of research that happens at Stanford.
Exactly. And so we were, again, as grad students, our goal is to publish a paper. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, could we solve this problem? What if we applied it in this way? And then we were brainstorming with him, and he said, oh, no, don't do this one. We said, oh, what if we could use the Wi-Fi and blah, blah, blah. He said, don't do this one. We have a team of 12 people trying to do it, and we've been spending 2 years, and nobody can figure it out. So if you try that, that's right. He's like, oh, well, but then he said, but it'll take you longer than 1 quarter, because the grant is for a quarter. You have to present at the end, and you won't have a paper. And we're like, oh, no, we need a paper. Okay, so never mind, we're not going to do that. We'll just do this. And then Dave and I were at, I think, the Stern or Wilbur dining hall. We were just eating dinner, and we were like, oh, but I think we can solve it. What if we try this, we try that? And so we just didn't tell Alok. We prototyped it. And then long story short, 10 weeks later, we had a working version of this thing that Qualcomm couldn't solve. And then when Alok found out, he was like, oh, Broadcom also has a team of 8 people. They haven't been able to do this a year and a half. Intel also has a team of 10 people. They haven't been able to do this for 2 years. So this is something real. You should definitely publish a paper. Maybe you should do something with it. So we're thinking, okay, well, we published a paper. We're really happy about that. And then we're graduating, right? And so as you graduate, back in the day, say 2010, 2011, if you're graduating in that era with a computer science degree from Stanford, you have a few options.
You go to Google.
You you work on ads, or at the time, you could go to Facebook, really popular, and work on ads. Maybe even Amazon and work on ads. Or we've got this thing, we built it seems like it's so useful, we're poor. If we start a company, goes bankrupt, we're still poor. What's the difference? Might as well try now. And why not let it go to waste? And I'd worked at these startups, and I knew that I love that environment where everything you do matters. And Dave had always been very enterprising and done a bunch of freelance stuff. So let's just try it. And very quickly, I realized we had no idea what we were doing. We had to apply to StartX, and then over the next 3 years, we learned everything that we need to know about how to build a company. And StartX and the community took us from these two kids with an idea and a technology all the way to a venture-backed company. We were caught in a bidding war. We sold our company to Apple.
This is Wi-Fi Slam.
Yeah, Wi-Fi Slam.
Okay, good. That's a I think a great also process of how what's the role of also StartX because it's being repeated. Before we go there, how many students I don't know if there are statistics, but just out of curiosity, from computer science, master of computer science at Stanford would end up in entrepreneurship in general?
Yeah, so our data shows that about a third of the companies that come out of the Stanford ecosystem are actually medical breakthroughs. Okay. So bioinformatics, therapeutics, drugs, cures, diseases, medical devices. Another 1 quarter or so, 20-25%, are hardware, clean tech, ag tech. We had a company that could farm sushi grade fish in the ocean instead of coastal, or these folks who have robotic harvesters for tomatoes and strawberries and things. So do that, and then the other half are split, sort of enterprise and consumer software, and often there's a balance. I think 22% of those are 22% overall are still business school students, and then there's another, I guess like 20 or 30% engineering.
You're talking about the portfolio of StartX or in general?
This is our data about Stanford.
About Stanford in general. So whoever graduates there, who goes into entrepreneurship at some point in their life.
Yeah.
So, but because I guess that probably the quality and the fact that Silicon Valley is very much about computer science, not only, but it's still front and center. I have the impression that a lot of successful entrepreneurs went that path from Stanford, and then I guess it's also, in fact, the ecosystem per se is well aligned, with some of the components that are, directly connected, at Stanford and the labs with a venture capital community. Again, and Nico's experience and talk that we had not too long ago is a clear example. That's where eventually, the more mature venture capitalists come to filter macro trends, if not investment, over time. All right, so let's go back into your path. So so you got acquired at Apple. Did you spend much time at Apple?
So we spent 3 years at Apple, and we ended up working on a variety of things. Some are still secret, and others maybe obvious, in Wi-Fi location, GPS. We were on the iBeacon team, all the sorts of accelerometer, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, sensor fusion type stuff we worked on. And then there was the data side, and then some other secret things I'm sure you can guess based on my background.
And when did you decide to leave Apple, and why?
So my time at Apple was actually really, really interesting. When you sell a company, you also reach out to the StartX mentor network and say, hey, we're going to sell our company. How do I make the most of this time that's going to be there? And they take different approaches, right? So some people will join and say, okay, great, I worked really hard. Apple's this huge company. No matter what I do, the stock price is going to be the same. So, we're just going to work and do whatever they want. Other people explore new opportunities. They're in this industry for a long time, like Jessica, our co-founder, spent a year helping us spin out what we were doing, and then immediately so Apple at that time was trying to create a new team, specifically around when they acquire companies, how do you maximize the value of those companies being created? So they needed to hire someone who had worked at Apple, had been acquired by a company at Apple, had an operations and finance degree, and was willing to work under that team. And she was like one of 3 people in the world that qualified, so off she went.
That's easy.
And so my perspective was this. Apple is this huge company, and of course, when you run your own company, you have to have board meetings, and you have great mentors at StartX, and you learn sort of how to have good board meetings. You have good peers, and you learn that kind of stuff. But you only get to have one board meeting a month, and you can't experiment too much because your company's on the line, right? If you embarrass yourself, then maybe it's over. At Apple, we used to joke. This is a fact. Apple's GDP is 29th in the world, beside Angola. Okay, so working at Apple is kind of like working at this whole country. And so you think, oh, but like you work at Apple, do you know each other? Well, if I said you're in Angola, you're in Angola, do you know each other? The answer is no, I don't even work, they don't even, right? It's like, could be totally different. And so if it's the size of a country, what can you do? They have like, 300 VPs of random things. And if I want to try to pitch them something and say, hey, it would be great if this team worked with this team, we did this thing, just cold email, right? What's the worst that can happen? They ignore you, they say no, and every now and then you get them. And so where else can you practice, like pitching ideas, creating collaboration, even like a board meeting with my investors was the same level of intensity as, I get 30 minutes with a VP and I'm going to pitch them something. But you get to test so many more. You can get, practice 10, 100 times more than you can in the real world because there's just so much opportunity. And even teams, right? So the group we were in started as like 6 people when we started, and then when we were done, it was at 70 or 100. And so you can even split up the people that report to you and try different management styles, right? Because again, in a startup, you ask for as much advice as you can, but you have to, you can't just experiment too much because if you don't get it right, your whole startup is on the line. Whereas at Apple, you can really experiment, and if something goes wrong, you can fix it, try something else, but you can learn 3-4 times faster. And Apple's surrounded by so much talent, right? If you want to talk to designers, you can. If you want to talk to data people, you can. If you want to, I remember we had this technology, and again, we could do all this stuff that other people couldn't. We were best in class at the time we were acquired. And we were going to launch on iOS, 8 or something. And before you launch, they have a rule. They have 3 teams will come through. One is the privacy team. They said, look, privacy is really important in Apple, so we're going to audit everything you do. And if it's not private enough, we're going to make you rewrite it. And the stuff was not private enough, so we had to rewrite it. Number 2, and like accurate, anyway, we'll get there. You have to be super, super careful with the data at Apple, and I respect them for that. Number 2, battery. They were like, hey, you need to reduce your battery cost to 0.1% per hour or we're not shipping. And we're like, oh, but we can't with the way we're doing it. Well, I'll rewrite it. It's okay, it's fine. And then the third one was cellular data plan, right? So you pay for your data, and if you are using XYZ too much, they gave us a budget of 0, except in certain scenarios where it was like some tiny amount. And we're like, yeah, but we're using data. It's like, why? It's like internet, and like the data mobile. And like, nope, rewrite it. So we had to re-architect. It was like, we did all this stuff behind the scenes so that it's like when you're at night sleeping, the phone's plugged in, 100% battery on Wi-Fi, it'll pre-download things it predicts you need for the next day. So we're never using your data. So it's just really, they push you to grow in all these ways. And if you really embrace it, I always say working at Apple, if you want it to be, is like going to a gym. It's exhausting, it's tiring, there's all this equipment, you just keep going until you can't take it anymore, but you come out stronger.
Did you, that's probably kind of outside of this discussion, but I saw that you also spent some time at Google. Did you feel the culture was very different?
Oh, totally. So this picture is when I was in New York Magazine, because when StartX was when we were in StartX, there was this reporter that came, and so like advice for you guys, right? Reporter that came down to say, hey, here's a co-working space. Like, if you guys work out of here, reporters will show up every now and then and say, hey, what's new? I want to learn about things. And this is at a time where I was like, I didn't wear shoes. I forget why. I think it was because I thought it was a waste. You have better traction anyway. Who cares? The co-working space is carpeted. I had all these like weird things to say. And also, I was being really scrappy. So the day he showed up, I wasn't living anywhere. Like my rent had ended over here. I was like camping out with a friend over there. My new lease was gonna start. He's like, that guy's interesting. And so, but I made this point about how, because he was saying, oh, you left Google to now build this startup. What is the difference? And I still remember telling him, and I still believe this to this day, the thing about Google is when you work there, they're like $1 trillion company. And back then, they made all their money from search. They still make a ton of money from search, but back then it was like all. And there were 600 people, so there's like 10,000 people that work at Google. And 600 of them work on search. So what is the rest of us all doing? And so you sit there and you're like, okay, no matter what I do, we're gonna make money because the search people are working on it. And you go to Google has
which is great, right? I mean, it feels like like Disney, right?
Because at the beginning, for many people, it feels great. And even at the beginning, it felt great for me. And you could tell that that's how it operated because you go to lunch, they have free food, everyone's free food. You go to lunch, you meet someone, and you're like, what do you work on? Like, oh, we're doing this, blah, 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 on Google, Gmail, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, I'm working on YouTube, blah, blah. And someone else like, oh, I work in search. I'm like, okay, you're important. We're just gonna, if you need space, like, oh, what do you want? Like, blah, blah, blah. The search people are, they're what turn the lights on. But for me, and maybe it's just because I'm an entrepreneur at heart, like I felt like within a couple months, people just weren't hungry enough. Like we had this meeting where they're like, hey, you know what? Maybe we should get more users. I'm like, yeah, what do we get? But I'm not in charge. It's like, great.
I did refer to some extent that one was not search as a driver.
And so the way I described it is people aren't hungry there. Like both metaphorically and actually, I gained like 15 pounds. There's ice cream all the time.
That's a typical 15 pounds at Google.
But when you're not hungry, you don't push yourself. And I'll contrast that to Apple, where also a $1 trillion company. But, and I was telling this story earlier. So when you're one person, two people, one of the best pieces of advice I got from the office of the president at Stanford is Roberta Katz, President Hennessy's VP of strategy, pulled me aside one day and she said, look, Joseph, when you're just starting a project or just starting a company or just starting a team, you're one person. And the decisions you make early on will set the course of that project or team for years. But the work that you do, if you do a whole day of work, you only move the company forward one day at a time. Okay, interesting. But the other thing is, if you're the size of Apple, if you're the biggest company in the world, and you see if you're Tim Cook or Jeff Bezos, when you make decisions, you influence tens, 20, 50,000 people and are gonna set the course of this company for years. But any day of work you do only moves the company forward one day at a time. So what does that mean about how you should prioritize if you're the leader? And I felt like at Apple, they embody that still at $1 trillion. So there are very basic tenets that our mentors will teach all our startups, and you guys are probably hearing this all the time. If you're starting a company, you need to laser focus on doing one thing well instead of doing a bunch of things mediocre. You need to choose strategies that play to your strengths, et cetera, et cetera. And when when we were at Apple, I remember I joined Apple around the time of the 5C. It came out famously, so this didn't meet expectations. And I still remember being on all hands where Craig Federighi came on stage, all of us were there, and he said, hey, here's the reason we're not satisfied with our outcome. It's because we didn't play to our strengths, we didn't laser focus on doing one thing well, we tried to do too much. And I thought, this is crazy, because the advice we're learning for when we're this tiny company is still what they're harping at, and it works at $1 trillion scale. And so there must be these universal truths, like skills you can build as an entrepreneur that will last forever. Whereas at StartX now, we see companies grow and there's lots of things we can learn. Recruiting, fundraising, tons of things are totally different. So I actually don't encourage companies to get really, really good at some of these skills because I know they're gonna change, right? So imagine recruiting. When you're one or two people and you're trying to hire someone, you want to excite them about what you're doing. You want them to be aligned to the problem that you want to solve, the vision of what you're trying to build. You're not gonna pay very well. And it's all about what it's gonna be like to work together, what it's gonna be like to put a stamp on this. At Apple, if you're recruiting, you show up, there's 300 CVs the first day, and they say, okay, I need you to look through all 300, and then tomorrow I'm gonna give you 300 more. Like, what? And so you're just like searching through them, okay, I want these ones, and then bam, there's another one, you're searching through one, bam, and it's just like piles and piles. And then people show up, and you're like, oh, let me excite you about working at Apple. They're like, no, I already want to work at Apple, I love Apple, that's my favorite. Like, okay, great, so there's no totally different skill sets. And so, why should I push these entrepreneurs to master those skills when it's going to change over and over again? We should probably help them do it. Fundraising, same thing. Raising your first money is going to be totally, totally different than raising a Series B, raising a Series C. Entirely different exercise. So why don't we set yourself up to do it and show you the answers that teach you how. And so I think at Google I never would have learned those lessons because Google, their success is a different form. And probably today, there are many things they still have to do to succeed as a company. But I felt like the opportunity to go from the smallest company in the world to the largest company in the world, working on the same thing, gave me that stark contrast to really appreciate. Most people, they have to build a company to the size of Apple and it takes them 15 years before they finally learn the lesson. We're like, oh yeah, remember 15 years ago I was learning this, and now you make the connection. So I feel incredibly grateful for that. Having that rare opportunity to learn, skip forward 15 years and see the end of what we're starting and figure out what really is universal and what really isn't.
So that takes you then to StartX. So 3 years into Apple, you decide probably it's time to move on for some of the reasons you just mentioned. So what convinced you to join StartX? StartX was really, operating at the time for a few years.
Yeah.
You joined before.
So StartX is really unique in a lot of ways. So even if you think about accelerators, incubators, usually they hire people to teach entrepreneurship to you, right? So like YC or TechCrunch, they have partners, they're employed, and their job is to make the company succeed. StartX, since the very beginning, has been a nonprofit model. It takes no equity from the companies. It charges no fees. It's funded by donations and grants and things. And the rule is, when you learn something, a year later, we're gonna ask you to teach it to the next people, all the way up the chain. And they have like 300 mentors also, who are just successful Stanford entrepreneurs who have already, made billions of dollars and just want to help the next generation.
So just justifying today, the connection with Stanford has been changing on and off, but you need to have someone in the funding team that has a connection with Stanford. Is that still the case to apply to StartX?
You need to have, so that you either need to be a current professor or a former professor, or a current student or someone was formerly a student.
Okay.
And only one co-founder has to have that status. So if you have a team of 4 and one of them is that, then it's all good.
Right.
But
you need to have one of these direct connections.
Yeah, otherwise you need to be invited to apply by an existing company. So actually, if you want to apply to StartX and you know another company that's passed our admissions process, whether they have Stanford or not, they can actually open the door for you. That's how that works. So why did I join StartX? Ever since the beginning, it was this sort of communal model. So we show up and year 1, we get lots of advice and we learn. Year 2, we're teaching other people and we're getting advice on the next steps, right? And sort of learning from each other. And everyone's sort of pitching in. It becomes this community where you're both, you want to help each other, but you're also inspired. Because I remember we sat in the desk our first year, and to my right was this company that, here we are building software, and I think it's pretty cool, but I'm just on my computer writing software. And here they are, and Divya, Andrew, Joe, and those folks, and saying, look, like our startup is we can take your skin cells and put them in a petri dish and turn them into beating heart cells so that we can cure a whole host of diseases that otherwise transplants would get rejected. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And then to my right was Tom Courier, a Teal Fellow, who had this autonomous robot. So you can build these large solar farms, right? But usually you need the panels or the mirrors to be mechanized. There's a motor on each one, so they have to track the sun. And it's really expensive and they break it to maintain them. And he said, okay, well, we're gonna build a different 10 times cheaper, no mechanics, just a loose mirror panel, and the robot's just gonna go around autonomously and adjust them over the course of the day slowly. So it's 10 or 100 times cheaper solar power. And then in front of me was this guy, DiffBot, Mike Tung, who had a PhD in computer science, and they had created like a whole new type of machine learning. They actually applied breakthroughs in computer vision and used that to solve web parsing problems. So they actually, today, they have the largest machine learning training data set of any company in the world. And then I'm like, okay, but here I'm just writing some software and like doing some math, like how can this be? So you're inspired by these people. And when they show up and they're giving advice to people around them, you think, okay, well, I better do that too. And that's 2010, 2011. So, by the time 2016 rolls around, I had been for the last 5 years fulfilling my obligation, returning the favor that StartX had given to me by continuing to coach and be around and help. And so it was really easy once I left Apple, I didn't have to work anymore. So what am I going to do? I actually thought maybe I'll move back to Canada. And I said, okay, before I do that, let me just make sure I'm volunteering enough and coaching sort of whoever's coming into StartX.
So it was literally in the giving back kind of a...
Well, it's required, right? Because you don't give equity. And so all we do is we want to give you the gift of bringing on other folks. And so I was there helping out, and then I figured, hey, this is actually really I guess I could go do something else, but nothing's gonna be more exciting than this.
You got a bug just by trying it.
And yeah.
And so you started full time, and this is a fantastic. I don't know if you want to share some of the numbers and whatever metrics you use,
sure.
But I want to talk about the model of a startup accelerator because it's something that's been changing over the last years and significantly. StartX has been extremely successful, but kind of constant in the model from the very beginning. So I think also the form of being a not-for-profit, not taking equity, is key. Also with the connections of the university is one of the key value proposition. But before we go that, what do you consider today a similar model that is somewhat as successful as StartX at different universities?
Yeah,
There's a lot of very cool
so I'll
universities
answer this question in a slightly different way. And I think this will be a good contrast for those of you who got to hear Nico speak as well. So when StartX began, it was for students by students, and that was what it was for. That was in 2009. And today, but it also 0% equity, this communal thing. So that part has stayed the same. It's still 0% equity and communal, but it's no longer, it serves an entirely different demographic now. So the majority of companies that are admitted every year today in StartX are Stanford professor founded companies, Stanford serial entrepreneurs. So like people like David Johnson, he founded Natera, IPO'd, next company they come to StartX to do. Or like Todd Gotula sold his previous company for $2.7 billion, one before that for $300 million. He's on his third company, came to StartX. Or industry experts. So like Tor Jacob graduated from Stanford 15 years ago and joined McKinsey as a consultant. And then over time, over those 15 years, became the head of their oil and gas division internationally. And then he realized, hey, this is problem in oil and gas. Guys, like we can't solve it and I'm just consulting and no one's solving it. So he just called two of his serial entrepreneur friends and then started a company, Arundo Analytics, and they went on to solve it. So that's a StartX company, right? So the majority are these folks now. We have only, at most, 1/3 of our cohort in any given year is first-time early-stage founders like we used to have. And actually, I remember in 2018, we were tracking to have the lowest student application rate ever. And we went on campus and we said, hey, why aren't you applying? Like, do you know about StartX? Yes. Are you starting a company? Yes. Like, do you think StartX will be valuable? Yes. Did you apply? No. I said, why? And they said, well, my professor applied and they didn't get in. How am I supposed to apply? What am I supposed to do?
What's the acceptance?
So the acceptance rate at StartX is 9%.
9%. How many applications you receive per batch? Just to give some random number.
Oh, we probably look at like thousands of applications a year. And so we said, okay, this is a problem because our data shows that of all the companies that come out of Stanford that reach $100 million in value or more, not in funding, but value, 22% of them are founded by students while they're still students. And so you're missing a huge chunk if you don't look after that. And if they go off and go on their own, we can't, our mentors want to help those people in various things. So we had to create a new program last year called the Student in Residence Scholarship, where we actually say, look, if you're a student and you're starting a company, you don't have to worry about applying to StartX if that's too hard. You can apply for a scholarship, we'll support you. You get half the money up front and half the money when you graduate, only if you don't drop out and you're still working in your company.
Where's the money coming from? Here is it?
We just pay.
The driver at StartX.
And so we gave out $250,000 in scholarship last year. We'll probably, we'll see how many teams get admitted this year. Probably about the same. We're hoping it'll be higher if there's better students. And that really reinvigorated the pool because once you see how StartX has changed and you realize, okay, I'm gonna show up. Like if you apply to StartX and you get in, to your right is somebody who's IPO'd before. To your left is somebody who's sold for $2.7 billion. And then this guy, 15-year international head of oil and gas at McKinsey. And we say, hey, your job, you have to teach other people too, right? We're gonna help you, but you gotta help. And you're like, who am I gonna help? Everyone, what is this? And so now with the students, we say, look, if you're not comfortable helping anyone, just find a student and tell them your story. Because believe it or not, all you have to do is tell them your story and they'll learn so many things. And so and the magic of that, and the reason StartX has had so much success over these 10 years comparing to other models is our staff, like we were talking earlier, we don't hire startup specialists or former investors to work at StartX. We hire educators, designers.
How many people do you have in staff? Just to get
so the staff is 11.
11.
And then the community is 1,500 and then 300 mentors. And most of the work is done by the community of entrepreneurs because we ask them not only to teach, but to contribute to driving this community itself. And so what happens is our job is to say, hey, after you coach a student, to help them realize like, that felt really good, actually. Because sometimes you'll show up, startups are hard enough. You guys know, it's already really, really hard. And even as you're building, you never really know if it's gonna work or not. And then you show up and everyone beside you is more impressive than you. You're like, oh, there's no way this is gonna succeed. But then you get to spend time with the student and you realize how valuable the basic things you're saying and like, oh my God, that's so great. And we inspire them to say, maybe I can coach and support other people around. So that's the bulk of what we do and why we do it. And does it work? So we don't want to claim that one model is better than another, but we do know that in our 10-year history, 92% of StartX's venture-backed companies are still growing or acquired after 10 years.
But that
Only
includes the
8%.
likes of the Lime.
Oh yeah, everyone.
So-
Lime, Kodiak, Branch, all those
also-
folks. And StartX companies, on average, reach $100 million valuation 2.6 times more often than any accelerator, any major accelerator in the world. And if you get into StartX, you immediately increase your chance of reaching Series A by 60%. And what I love is, $25 billion market cap. And one of the stats I brought here also is female founders are significantly underrepresented here in Silicon Valley, at least. Less so in MIT, Harvard area, so congrats to them. But our female founders are raising 5 times the industry average proportion of venture funding, which is an incredible achievement just for that group. And so I always say the StartX, we attract different entrepreneurs than you would look for in accelerators. Again, like professors aren't going to, if I'm a professor at Stanford and in my lab we find a cure for liver disease, I've just cured liver disease. So the question is, how do I get this to cure real patients and not make sure it's not just a paper? But when you do that, they'll pick up the phone, they'll call their friend at Kleiner Perkins and say, hey, I think I cured liver disease, and they wire $15 million. Right? So the learning is different, the problem is different. And these people aren't going to show up and say, oh, maybe I should give up 7% to learn how to incorporate. So the main group that we target today have to serve in the Stanford alumni and professor corps is these folks that otherwise aren't going to give up equity and have nowhere to go otherwise. And so that's the majority of who we support. We had to create the scholarship program to help the earlier folks. And still about 1/3 of our cohort are first-time early stage founders, and we just try to keep them inspired and motivated.
Back to the question of before, why do you think this model is not replicable? Why MIT is not doing exactly the same thing, or some other key universities around the world? I guess one is the ecosystem that is hard to recreate, but what else? Because this is nothing new, at least for Stanford, for StartX.
So I credit the StartX model to Cameron Titleman for having come up with this early on. And he, under the advisement of Jerry Yang of Yahoo, were the ones that originally sort of set this in motion. President Hennessy, very formative also to create some of the foundations that we have. But all of what we pay attention to is the culture. We have had all the major universities reach out to us over many years asking, hey, how can I have a program like StartX too? And we'll sit down with them, we'll coach them and give them advice on different things. And I still remember this story. Now, different universities succeed for different reasons, right? The culture that we have here is unique to where we are, and it's why we work the way we do. I remember talking to Harvard because they came out and reached with us, and Cameron was saying, look, we explained to them all the things they need to do to replicate our model. You've got to have these learning goals, you've got to have this blah, 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 you've got to have coaching. And Harvard came back to us and said, oh, we can't have people tell us what they need to learn. I said, what? Why not? He said, well, if you get into Harvard, you already know everything. We can't admit that we need to learn things. I was like, okay. This is going to be hard then. We have to find other words and figure out what to do. And I'm not one to say, therefore we should change the culture. Harvard is very successful. They have a larger endowment than Stanford. Obviously lots of great startups come out of it. And as any entrepreneur knows, one size doesn't fit all, right? There's no perfect formula for this, but I do know what works here for this group even, right? I imagine if Y Combinator or Techstars or 500, if they decided our customers are going to be these Stanford professors, the serial entrepreneurs, the people who, because right now who they target are, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, I need some early money, I'm willing to give up 7% just to be able to start.
Most importantly, they're for-profit,
of course,
businesses. So that's the totally different reason for being that I think is at the core. Eventually, I think of the success and also the flexibility that Stanford and StartX has to filter. Even companies are way more mature. When I come and attend the demo days, one of the things that I've seen more often than not, a lot of companies are very mature.
Yeah,
way past their seed stage. But that's not what you find at 500 startups or at the value proposition of the startup accelerators that are equity based.
And our mission is to create the most talented pool of people you can get advice from. So if we find someone really great, we're going to put them in the network. And they're going to get value and then realize, oh, I should give back too. And Stanford is educational mission. We're educationally driven. And so if we're creating better lifelong education, that's a win for us. We don't even count if there's a company that comes through admissions and the judges say, that's $1 billion idea, but then the other judges say, oh, but the culture they bring isn't the right fit for the types of founders we want in our community, we won't accept them. And our mentors came to us, a lot of our, we've been here for 10 years. So early on, mentors show up, hey, I'm Stanford, I've had my success, I want to give back. And we asked some of them, why do you stay? We've got we have 1,500 founders now. When I was in StartX, there were 20 companies total and 300 mentors. It was great, all these mentors you can talk to. Now there's 1,500 entrepreneurs. So if I show up, and these entrepreneurs are folks, Stanford professors, former head of oil and gas at McKinsey, why do I still need the mentors? Why are the mentors even still here? And one after another, I was talking to them and said, one thing that makes StartX unique is, yes, you have talented people. Yes, they're solving important problems, but everyone here works with integrity. And I can't find that other places. We filter for culture as one of the important things that we look for when we bring in people, because our mission, we believe that if you lead with a community that can provide the most resources to each other, and the right kind of people that want to build that together, it will lead to more success. And what we found is it does. We have corporates coming to us now that say, look, we're trying to set up a corporate venture arm, and I need to set up an investment committee. And I could hire anyone in the world, but they're not going to be correct 92% of the time. You guys are correct 92% of the time. So can we do some kind of partnership where you use your admissions process to help diligence the companies you want to invest in?
Because that's actually very interesting.
Yeah, so that's one of the models that we have, for example. And our diligence process takes hundreds of hours per team, because one team that applies to StartX, it's reviewed by over 50 judges. And each judge specializes in a particular thing. So we have one judge that's only for enterprise, B2B, small, medium business, SaaS, but even that, they only look at the team dynamics of those teams. So, and then we have another person who's med device, medical class C, blah, 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 and they only look at the motivations or the culture of that person. And then we have other people who say, I'm a software big data person. I only look at your software AI to make sure it's up to snuff. So it's this panel of 50 judges for every single company, and such a rich thing. So that's one of them for sure. We also have the obvious sponsorship models like Amazon, AWS, or Silicon Valley Bank, who wanna
see the value of the community there. What do you count as a CEO of a StartX? What do you track as KPIs at the end of the year? So this has been a bad year. This has been an excellent year.
Yeah. So the number one metric that we care about is the quality of engagement that we have. So we want to know that when you walk in as an entrepreneur and you have 3 things you want to learn, that you get the best advice out of the StartX community that you could get anywhere, and we rate that.
So that's based on feedback that you get from the founders
and outcomes, right? So if we have, we sometimes will have a series of mentors that are rated really highly, but we'll look at data over 7 years and say, hey, the companies you're coaching are actually not succeeding as much as these companies. Why? Or vice versa. We actually had a panel just the other day. And again, credit to Cameron. I only became CEO in 2017, but over the last 10 years, he's been collecting data on every single team we admit, all the things they need to learn, all the progress they make. And we had just a few months ago, we had a panel with, not all 50 of our judges, but a bunch of them, say, hey, we can now, when you make a decision on whether to take a company, yes or no, you don't find out for 7 years whether it was the right decision. And for the first time, we can look back 7 to 10 years and start to answer those questions. We hired our first quantitative data specialist last year also, to start to unpack that kind of stuff, which over 10 years of StartX history, which mentors are providing the best advice on which topics, right? Because even a great mentor may be specialized in one thing. Which judges are actually leading to the right choices, right or wrong, which criteria, what can we see in companies? And so, there's a lot to learn still, and I think this is part of the most exciting time at StartX.
And that's one of the first KPIs. I mean, again, as opposed to most of other commercial accelerators, is market value and potential returns, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of exit. We saw 500.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a lot of transaction happening.
So here's the thing about those metrics, right? If you say my metrics are company valuation, I'll tell you this as an entrepreneur also, right? As an entrepreneur, you think, oh, the number one thing I need to do is raise my valuation, become worth more, become worth more, become worth more. The problem is, if you're optimizing for a metric and it's company valuation, you have to wait 7 years to know if it worked, because there are so many companies that like go up and then come back down. So we have to find things that we believe to be inherently valuable. And the quality of advice as compared to whether you can get it elsewhere is inherently valuable. When you're in a startup, you have to choose what you measure. And there's a rule that we have that says, if you want to improve something, make sure, if you just show if you say, hey, we want to improve how many, Evan Spiegel used to do this all the time. He said, I want to maximize the number of snaps that people send. And they would just have it on a screen. It would always tell you this month, this week.
This is one of StartX company.
This is Snapchat. You guys know Snapchat. And if you show it on the screen and everyone sees it, then when they're doing their work, they think, oh yeah, what can I do to make that higher, right? At Google, whether you like it or not, what they show on the screen is the number of users. But at Apple, all they show is how excited you are about the product we're going to launch. Isn't that interesting? In the design world, they care about what the user is concerned. Pinterest is kind of like this. So Pinterest shows the user needs, and they have those on. You can walk in the Pinterest office.
It's right
on the
here,
street.
Actually.
Yeah.
We're not this wall is Pinterest on the other side.
Right. And so if you have any friends who work there and you give you a tour, you'll see every other wall is like, this is Jane, a 37-year-old, blah, 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 living in thing. This is what she cares about. This is what makes her happy. And that's all they care about. And they they measure, when you're doing your work, you look and you say, okay, how relevant is my design to that human being? So what you measure is what will improve over time. And that's why you're asking this question, of course. It's salient. And I think the advice to entrepreneurs is be careful what you measure. If you only measure valuation, you may or may not be able to maximize that valuation because it's a long tail measurement. Pick things you can measure that have short feedback cycles, but predict longer term outcomes. Right? If you believe more snaps being sent per day, per month, per week is going to lead to long term valuation, then measure the snaps, not the valuation. But if you choose something to measure, you'll end up optimizing for it.
Great, and that's for StartX as an entity. What do you think are the KPIs of success of StartX as a program sponsored by Stanford as an institution? Do you think would be different?
Well, what I know, okay, so Stanford has, this is a great question, and then this leads to an excellent conversation. Because Stanford, the university, is like, hundreds of thousands of professors in 7 different schools. Everyone's got their own opinion, even within Stanford, of everything. Any idea comes in Stanford, everyone has a different opinion. But what I will say is a couple things were really important at the founding of StartX. One is lifelong learning. The idea that, we've given you this degree or we've given you this professorship and we want you to go out and have impact in the world. Your learning doesn't stop today, because if it does, your impact will stop today too. And so they want lifelong learning, and this model where, many of Stanford's most accomplished, successful mentors and entrepreneurs are now here being part of that learning, right? Because they even come to learn, but also to provide that learning is really powerful for them. But, and then from the monetary point of view, think about if StartX creates 5 more billionaires and all of them donates a building to Stanford, they've made all their money back, right? So it's a strange world that we live in, and I do my best to understand the dynamics of it. But of course, my focus is how do we solve these problems that we care about? I always tell my entrepreneurs, any new entrepreneur, that when you think about why StartX is here and what we're trying to do, understand how Silicon Valley works. Silicon Valley is built to select winners, right? So we have, today there's thousands of angel investors out there every day, and they're this big machine, right? If you're trying to raise money, you're going to talk to 20 angel investors, and they'll talk to each other also, and they're going to decide who they decide to fund, who gets to start companies, and who doesn't get the funding and can't start. They decide which companies are started, which ones are not. VCs, even as you get to Series B, Series C, even if they've invested in your company and are backing you, month to month, I'm deciding, okay, which of my portfolio companies am I going to double down on and ensure gets to grow, and which ones am I going to cut loose? And TechCrunch Disrupt, which I think is a really exciting, high energy thing that really defines the startup world. There's 1,000 companies that'll show up for TechCrunch Disrupt, and only one of them wins, and only one of them gets the PR support and that publicity, even though there's 999 other teams solving important problems. and they don't get any attention at all. And so at StartX, we ask, okay, what is creating that dynamic? And often it'll be, a VC will say, hey, if I fund you and you put me on my board, I know this executive at Apple. I know, I can help you with this advice, so you want me. Or if you're talking to an angel investor, they'll say, I can introduce you to these customers or whatever various things, so you want me. And we believe that if you can get a critical mass of the best entrepreneurs and mentors from Stanford and around the world, those entrepreneurs can provide all those things for you, and you're free to go raise the money or build your company any way you want. And so we talk about, instead of selecting winners, we want to create winners out of anyone who deserves it. And that's how we drive the decisions that we make.
Last question. You mentioned in some of previous interviews that one of the suggestions that you have for the founders is to avoid to try to sell their product.
Yeah, I love this one. So this is a great question for people at your stage. I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who say, okay, the best sign of success is that people are buying my product. That's true. But you've all heard about product market fit. Who here's heard about product market fit? Okay. Product market fit is important because just getting 1 or 2 users today doesn't mean you'll have even 1 or 2 tomorrow, let alone 1 or 200 or 1 or 2,000. And if you find someone and you badger them and say, hey, please use it, please use it, please use it, please use it, maybe they're only using it because you told them to. If you tell them, don't use it, here's what I'm doing, don't use it, I don't use it, it's hard to download, I'm not telling you the URL, I'm not telling you, and they still use it, you've got something. So how do you know, how important is it? And this goes all the way back to the thing I said at the very beginning. When you start your company, when you make a decision, right? Because this information you are receiving and you're making long-term decisions, you're setting the strategy and the vision of your company based on this. When you make a decision, it will set the course of your company for years. But any work that you do only moves your company forward 1 day at a time. And that is a universal skill set because it still applies when you're the size of Apple. And so what are you optimizing for when you start? You're optimizing for getting 20 users as fast as possible? Or optimizing for getting 20 million users as fast as possible. And the exercise is different. I don't know if that answers your question or gets you to ask it in the same way. If you have any follow-ups, we can cover it. But that insight I think is really important. We see so many students that will go start companies and say, okay. And I say, what are you doing in a sales meeting? And say, I'm trying to convince them to use this and use this and use this. Okay, and did they use it? It's like, oh yeah. And then did they use it a week later? No. Why? Did you even get a chance to learn what would make them want to use it on their own? I could talk about stuff forever.
No, I think that's a great ending. So Joseph, I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I know that I would go on and on, but that's the kind of the time that we have. So
great.
Excellent.
And thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.
It's very great.